Welcome to Trenchometry. If you've spent any time in or around the trenches, playing offensive line isn't just blocking. It is chess at light speed. You're controlling angles while a 280-pound defender tries to destroy your running back. Every snap, calculating leverage, mirroring footwork, and anchoring against pure violence. Miss one step and your franchise player gets flattened. We're here to discuss the most undervalued aspect of the game of football, the offensive line. Remember, you master the trenches, you win the war. My guest today is a nationally recognized and decorated strength and conditioning coach. He has been the National Strength Coach of the Year twice, in 8 and in 16. He is currently entering the early stages of retirement after helping the University of Alabama football program as the special assistant to the head coach. He's looking to create a high-performance culture that produces athletes competing in the toughest football conference in the land. Prior to being a part of the Crimson Tide, he helped mold the athletes at the University of Washington, culminating in a Sugar Bowl win and a national championship appearance. He has worked for a number of collegiate programs, including Fresno State, the University of Tennessee, and the University of South Florida. He has served as a strength and conditioning coach for multiple professional franchises, including the Cincinnati Bengals, Kansas City Royals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Berlin Thunder. He's a national expert, a published and best-selling author, a podcast host, a coach, a father, and a husband to Angela. I'd like to welcome Coach Ron McKeefery to Trenchometry today. Coach, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Yeah. Hey, Paul, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and sorry you had to read that laundry list of places.
As we texted back and forth, I said something along the lines of, Coach, you might need a second page for your resume. And you said that congratulating yourself on being old, that's how you accumulated such a laundry list. But very impressive and a lot of knowledge and wisdom there that you can use to pass on to people in a position that need it. And so let's start right off as a strength and conditioning coach. You got a bunch of guys coming in that are freshmen, coming out of high school, 18, 19-year-old kids. How do you go about establishing a foundation for those guys? What do you look for in them, and what are you trying to accomplish that first, say 3 or 4 months when they're probably, most of them aren't playing. Hopefully they're not playing. It's much more fun and easier to get a 23-year-old ready to play a game than a 19-year-old. But what are you looking to do? How are you going to go about establishing that with those young guys?
Yeah, it all starts with a meeting that I call a why meeting. And I didn't call it a why meeting until I read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek. But there's two things you have to do very, very quickly in strength and conditioning, right? One, you have to establish this relationship to be able to take somebody further than they've ever gone before in a very short amount of time. And that requires a lot of trust. That requires a lot of relationship, the whole deal. And so that's hard to do. So I meet with every single player very quickly. I ask them 3 questions that I feel like helps me get to their why very, very fast. And that's, if they weren't a football player, what would they do? Most of these athletes have never thought about their mortality in the sport or never thought about what they would do without it. So getting an understanding of what they would want to do helps me with that. So I ask them what's the most difficult thing they've ever been through in their life, because we're kind of a product of our environment. So knowing that, and so you learn about these kids as people. You can really start there and bring those to the surface when you need to. And then I always ask them who's the most influential person in their life. And I call that person and tell them something good, because most of the time they're hearing something bad, right? Mm-hmm. They got in trouble, they did something. This is now the most influential person in their life kind of signing off on me as a coach that cares about them. And that allows me to do 3 things in the weight room. If I can bring in what their life goals are and help relate that, like if they want to be a president of a company or own a company, or if they want to manage people, or they want to do whatever, if they're acting like a fool in the weight room, it allows me to be like, hey, look, are you going to, when you run your own company, are you going to act like a fool? This is tough, and this is the hardest work that they've ever been through, but it's not as tough as that most difficult thing they've ever been through. Or relate it back to their person and be like, if grandma, pastor, coach was sitting in the stands right now, would you act like this? And it allows me to kind of motivate them without cussing, screaming, getting in their face. I'll get intense just like the next guy, but I've found that getting them to go to another place, a higher level, if you can do it that way and you keep their goals in front of them and the people that they're closest to in front of them, that typically works better, right? And then that's backed up by an evaluation where we go through the entire NFL Combine test. We do what I call defining good. And so all these kids, out of 30 years of coaching, I don't think I've met a single college football player that didn't think that they were going to the NFL. Mm-hmm. And so rather than be a dream killer, when I have a pretty good idea who's going to make it and who's not going to make it pretty quick. But rather than shut that down, I define good, and I let them know from a physicality standpoint, from what it's going to take mentally. This is what an NFL player is, and here's where you're at now. Sit back and ask them, like, who out of the entire building is going to be able to help you accomplish those goals, right?
Right.
It's your strength coach, it's your offensive line coach, it's your coordinator, it's your head coach, it's your trainer, your nutritionist, on and on and on. So rather than have this kind of us versus them mentality of like, oh, I got to go work out, or I got to go to treatment, or I got to go to meetings, or I got to do, we become the people that can help you accomplish your goals and your dream.
Right.
And it sets the foundation for everything else, which is then really identifying where they need to develop.
Right. You're trying to come alongside them more like an ally than a adversary, kind of forcing them. It's a, we'll do this together. Come along with me and I'll show you how to go. Do most of those kids come in at 19? Are they able to answer those questions readily? Or are they,
Yeah, it's a good question. What I typically done in the past, what's worked the best for me is I usually have a team meeting before we start a
hmm,
training cycle, right? And in that meeting, I set the foundation of what that looks like. So I answer those three questions. I talk about how my brother was murdered. I talk about my wife being my most influential person and why. I talk about that sets the stage for a level of vulnerability that I think that
mhm,
they understand what I'm asking when they come to that meeting. I tell them to think about it and make sure that they have something. And I might ask a few follow-up questions to dig a little bit deeper. But yeah, I mean, these guys, they do. And, I think the biggest thing, like you said earlier, like I think there's a lot of coaches it's positional leadership. I'm the coordinator, I'm the strength coach, I'm the head coach, whatever it might be, and you got to do what I'm asking you to do. And I think my experience in the NFL early on was one of my first jobs. Really set the stage of like these guys don't have to do what you ask them to do.
yeah,
Whether or not they're getting paid or not, they don't have to do it. Now, it's generally accepted the lower you go that they're just going to do it because you said so. But the truth is that transformative leadership, that's what really stands out. And that's what really separates the good from the great.
yeah. So you're trying to find the buttons to push. Find the buttons to push that'll get the most out of that player, that athlete. Because you're gonna put them in demanding situations. You're gonna make them uncomfortable. Every time they see you, they're not coming in for a hug. You're gonna make them uncomfortable before it's all said and done. They are going to feel uncomfortable.
It's typically a painful experience too. Like you have
Yeah.
to go through those workouts at 6 a.m. and sometimes in super cold weather. That's not an easy thing to do. And they didn't come to
Mm-mm.
school to learn plays. They came to school to play football.
Right. So as you get the buttons defined and they're hopefully clearly defined or they're in the process, you help them to refine those button images up so you know which ones to push and which ones not to push. You don't want to send a guy off the rails. What are you going into physically? How are you going to physically establish what you need to do with those guys? Are you putting them through tests? Are you maxing them? Are you running them? Like what does that look like for you when you're trying to gain the physical insight into what they can do?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where they're at in the journey, right? If this is the first time I'm ever working with them, then yeah, we go through kind of an orientation week where they learn the pace of our training and keep them separate. And we talk to them about our flow and our terminology and put them through the paces. That's typically faster or, more intense than a lot of what they've been used to. So that kind of gets their attention, right? Because that welcome to college or welcome to the NFL type of experience. And then that's followed up by the evaluation and really looking at, for college, it's taking the combine test because that's what they're going to be held accountable to. Getting that in front of them and being able to define that good combined with a bunch of diagnostics that we've been able to do in the later years here where technology has gone to a higher level. That's going to be things like our force plate and our counter movement jumps and mid-thigh pull. It's going to be our different jump tests like mod RSI, and things like that are going to be more kind of injury diagnostics, things that are going to identify muscular imbalances or muscular deficiencies. And those are kind of an ongoing thing.
And so those are going to help you tailor more specific to an individual than let's say the offensive line. Like there's going to be some lifts that you're going to say, okay, offensive line, you're doing this, and then Joe and Bob and Jim, you are doing this, this, and this because they have that deficiency that you've been able to clarify and justify, or I don't know, diagnose, prognose there as far as what they need to do to get better there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain level of like the biggest challenge for strength and conditioning at this point or for development at this point right now is bound this dichotomy of building a team and the camaraderie and the belief that has to go into winning championships balanced with the individualization of how do I get this athlete to specifically in the time that I have, which especially in college is limited, how do I individualize this while still speaking
Mm,
team? And
yeah.
so there's a certain level of meat and potatoes that everybody does because organizationally that's the best thing to do. And a bicep on a wide receiver is no different than a bicep on a offensive lineman. They might just do different weight, but how to overload that, how to develop that is relatively the same. Where you start to individualize things is specifically with what we would do in between sets and what we would do on the set rep scheme for the particular athlete. And so, for example, for me, like with our offensive line is the only position where I would go more than 4 people per rack, but I would keep the starting 5. And so the way that we set
Mm,
it up, the middle rack is the starting 5. To the right is the second string. To the left is the third string. And my job around is if guys aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, I'll demote guys, move guys up based off who I trust in that environment and who's working at that level, right? In that rack, I might have a freshman center that is not as developed, maybe needs more muscular strength, more hypertrophy, those types of things. And I might have a senior right tackle that needs to be more strength power, more speed power. So rather than lift them at different racks or have that freshman work with other freshmen, even though he's not going to be on the field with them at that point, I keep him at the same rack. But when he gets up, he might be doing 5 sets of 8 on the bench at a certain percentage because he needs hypertrophy. Whereas that senior might be doing 5 sets of 3, but using velocity based training and working at a
right.
certain ratio. And that keeps it so the flow is the same and I can train them the same, you know, but they're working together and developing that camaraderie that's needed to be able to be
Were
glue.
those demotions and promotions communicated to the football side of the house, or was
Yeah.
that just weight room specific?
So we grade every single workout 0 minus. 0 means that you did exactly what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to show up. You're supposed to do a great job, have a great attitude. You're supposed to be working at the prescription on the workout card, those types of things. A minus means that you were a distraction, that you were working consistently below the prescription, that you had a poor attitude, those types of things. A plus is obviously the opposite of that, that you were affected more than just yourself, that you were consistently working above the prescription. And so that grade, we grade that, we send that up to the coaches. We give a reason, we define why. So
Mhm.
it's just writing a minus. We would specifically say why they got a minus. And that information is communicated to the athlete. It's communicated, it's posted for their peers, and it's sent to their position coaches so that everybody's on the same page.
The young guys who aren't, let's say, redshirt, and those guys who are redshirting, are they lifting more often than the guys, the travel squad guys, the guys that are playing every week? How's that in season look for those guys?
Yeah. Okay. Where you went in season with it, it makes it a little bit different. In season, yes.
Okay.
So depending on the number of snaps is the number of days that you would train. So if you were over 30 snaps, then you were on a 2-day a week program
Okay.
with some additional work based off of kind of needs analysis that we would create on Sunday of where your body was at. Right.
And that's kind of like a maintenance. You're just maintaining, trying to
Yeah. We never use that word, but yeah, you're trying to sustain their
sustain.
strength. Yeah. You're trying to sustain their strength levels. You're training every 72 hours. So there's not a detraining effect and you're balancing out like the physicality of playing offensive line at that level with their training, right? If they played less than 30 snaps, they would go 3 days a week. And then if they're a red shirt, they would go 4 days a week.
And you're trying to bulk those guys up.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're in a little bit different training program that is typically it's about size and mass. But again, like at Washington, we had the Joe Moore award winning offensive line. We had some really good players and we had some really good backups that were just, we just had really good players in front of them. So
Yeah.
it wasn't necessarily that they lacked the size and mass. They might have lacked a little bit of the power or just the opportunity.
So, and this is gonna be hard for you to answer this question, I suspect, because it's very basic, and you're gonna go 3 levels above it on your answer, I'm sure. But what's the strongest offensive lineman you've had come through one of your programs? And then
Well,
and then how would you measure that? Or is it like high school level? We're doing a 3 lift, a bench, squat, and clean, and totaling those 3 lifts up. That's how we would determine that. How would you go about? What was your metric?
yeah, I mean, it's a question that I would have a hard time answering because I think
I
right.
figured.
I think, strength and power had, Frank Davis was a 550-pound bench presser that was the first Panamanian to go to the NFL when I was at South Florida. Troy Fatano is the left tackle or left guard for the Steelers right now. He's left tackle for us, but he's massive, such great strength. But then you got a guy like Roger Rosengarten that was on that same team that was a second round draft pick for the Ravens, a third round draft pick. And I mean, his speed and power was on another level. And so, again, I think it's relative to what you're looking for out of the
Hmm.
position. But I mean, you got a guy like Parker Brailsford right now that was with us at Washington and then with us at Alabama. That's the starting center for Alabama right now. And he's a smaller guy. He's only about 280 pounds. Like his strength to body weight ratio was the highest. And maybe he's probably the strongest that I've had from strength to body weight. I put a lot of stock personally in strength to body weight. I mean, it
Hmm.
takes a certain level of mass to play that position. If you got a good strength to body weight and you got a good conditioning level, you can usually win with those guys.
That's like like a Mark Stepnowski for the Cowboys, who you'd see all those big dudes on either side of him, and you're like, oh man, those are monsters. And you look at him, you're like, well, he's a big dude, but he's size wise and mass wise compared to those other guys. So I would be interested to see what in his height of his career, what he was putting out in a body weight to strength ratio. I'm sure that was phenomenal when it's all said and done there. So as these guys progress, and you originally were talking there with your racks, off season type of training, I'm assuming. Where do you balance the strength versus the conditioning aspect of it? How much are you doing an hour, say an hour and a half weight room, 45-minute type thing? And then what would that conditioning aspect look like in the off season?
Yeah, it varies again throughout the year. Typically, just kind of broad strokes. We would go 4 days a week of lifting. So the first phase, so like winter would be an 8 week period. Summer would be an 8 week period typically. Now there's training throughout the entire year, but that's kind of the two main training periods. So if you look at those,
With a spring ball in the middle there, right?
yeah, you got ball in season, you got in season program, you got, some post like finals weeks and things
Hmm.
like that. You're still training, but it's a different type of program. But each one of those phases or each one of those training periods have two phases. In the first phase of the winter, we would lift 4 days a week and we would run 3 days a week. In the second phase, we would run or lift 4 days a week and run 4 days a week.
And that first phase is like a conditioning style of run, not necessarily working on increasing speed, is what I'm
Right.
assuming.
It's a lot of it is more conditioning based. It's putting in a lot of speed and it mixing in a lot of speed work too, and the mechanics of that.
Okay.
Be able to kind of slow things down a little bit and kind of work back on mechanics and then kind of finish with a conditioning effect each day. And that goes for agility too. Like so basically 2 of those days were kind of agility based. One of those days was linear based. And then in the 4 day split, that kind of goes to 2 days of linear, 2 days of lateral, essentially. And the lateral are kind of what people would normally say is their mat drills or their
Mm, okay.
agility, whatever, followed by position work during that time.
And are you focusing on, you mentioned earlier the NFL combine drills. Is this where you're working in those, the say the cone drill, the 5 yard shuttle, the 40 yards, the starts, the mid part of the 40, the finish of the 40, those are where you're working on those phases?
Yeah. So in the first phase, that's exactly what you're doing is you're breaking down technique. You're really kind of making sure that you're cleaning that up. You're kind of getting, you're getting back health. You're still working your butt off, but like I would always have to protect me from myself. Like if we're training, we're going to train hard. So rather than do that with volume with more days, I would reduce the number of days to 3 in that first phase because I knew if I went a fourth day, I would just be running them into the ground.
Hmm.
You know. So now in the second phase, it's 4 days of lifting, 4 days of running, and we're adding in the skill work with the position coaches, the 7-on-7 work with the skill. We're adding in the agilities with our position coaches as well, and we're still factoring in. And so, kind of taking your speed examples as a blueprint. The first phase, we're kind of breaking down the techniques and really dialing in their force velocity profile and all that. The second phase, it's all more competitive and actually like true races, true full effort bouts, and putting it more in like a football environment.
You mentioned something there in the first sentence. You said save you from you. What are you looking at and judging when you look at your athletes to know when you need to back off? Is there something that like a telltale sign that you were looking at that when you see this, you're like, I'm running them too hard, I'm pushing too hard, and I got to walk it back a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Again, it goes the gamut. Now, you and I have been in this field for a long time, so early on, it's just watching all the normal overtraining markers. Guys are tired, guys are sore, guys are sick. Those types of things. Kind of start to kind of see some of these overtraining markers that would come about. Now with technology, we're able to use GPS, HRV, heart rate, a
Okay.
lot of even very, wellness surveys and things like that to really get a handle on what the athletes are. But I think still you kind of come back to you have 4 or 5 athletes that are thermometers at every position that like you're checking in with those guys that are going to give you legitimate, accurate feedback, and you're kind of balancing that with technology or your own kind of intuition.
And the thermometers, as you say, would be guys that are getting after it nonstop. They're the dudes that come in and do everything you ask, the tempo you ask it, with the effort and the intensity that you're asking. So you have a they're going to know because they haven't missed a rep, they haven't skipped a lift, they haven't dogged it on any runs. Those are the guys that you need to have your finger on their pulse, right?
Yeah, it's definitely there's a large portion of those guys, but you don't necessarily just want the coach's pets, right? You want the guys that are also they're the maybe the ones that like to fight the system, but at the same time when they turn the lights on and it's time to go compete, they compete. And so just seeing and watching those guys, like a lot of wide receivers kind of fit that mold. They'll work. If you tell them to run, they'll run. But if you start seeing them kind of start grabbing their hamstrings or stretching their back or come in and they're just dead to the world and they're not joking and laughing like they would normally be doing, like those are all signs that, hey, you're probably like, you're flirting with that line a little bit.
Much is nutrition a factor in all of this?
Yeah, you kind
Scale
of cut out
scale of
there.
1 to 10. Put it on 1 to 10, what would you say nutrition's importance is for these guys that are
Oh,
out there
yeah.
doing all this?
Well, I think for the elite, it's super important. I think the lower levels that you go, mass kind of just wins out. And there is something to that in terms of just having pure mass. When you get to the higher levels and you're going across, you're facing a 280-pound guy that's just as strong, but a little bit quicker. Like you better have technique, you better have flexibility, you better have good conditioning, and you better not have limited range of motion because of body composition. So it plays a big factor, not to mention the fuel of going in and giving that level of intensity. It's not, can you do it one day? It's, can you do it back to back days
Mhm.
for entire year? And that's the hard part.
That makes me I have this debate with my son often. My youngest son and I debate this back and forth about the conferences, and you've been in a couple here. Is it fair to say that, and let's just use the SEC because I'm biased, the SEC week in, week out is requiring more of its athletes than some of the other conferences?
I mean, I've been in 2 SEC schools, right? And I've been in other conferences as well. I mean, we went to a national championship at Washington, and I'd put that team up against any SEC school. I think it's relative. I think that same thing that year in the Pac-12 when, like that was as hard of a conference as there was.
Mhm.
I mean, Williams, you had Bo Nix, you had, a bunch of good players in that league at that time. I think the difference in the SEC versus a lot is I think the resources in the SEC are significantly more than other places, and because of that, there's a more ask from the athletes than there are a lot of other
Hmm.
places in terms of their time and their commitment and those types of things. And I think it's probably a little bit deeper as well because again, more resources to be able to kind of to bring in better walk-ons, better kind of secondary
Yeah.
players. So I think like I don't think the conference, especially now with NIL, I don't think that that's as much of a differentiator as it has been in the past. I would agree with you early, kind of in our career, like the haves really separated themselves from the have-nots. But like now, I think it's all going into players more so than facilities. Kind of, it's very much an
Right.
NFL mindset that think I don't think the school or the conference really matters as much as it.
So as a strength coach, how does the NIL impact you bringing in a dude who's been somewhere else to maybe 2 or 3 other places before he gets to you? Is that I gotta think that's gotta be something really hard because you're kinda on a compressed time schedule to get to know the whys, as you mentioned earlier, which is figuring out those buttons and where they're defined and how they're defined. That's gotta be hard to do that with those guys coming in. I just see that being a really tough human predicament to be in because you got the emotions of the humans, you got the wants, the goals, and all that kind of stuff. And they're obviously, if they're coming in on an NIL deal, they got lots of money, so they don't really have to. It's almost like they don't have to listen as much, is what I kind of perceive that. Is that kind of how you would break that down? And how did you solve that riddle?
Yeah, I think I mean, just like with anything where things become more transactional, it makes it a little bit harder to develop the relationships
Mhm.
or have or to be able to plan for long-term development. It'd be like, it used to be that your freshmen or sophomores are going to hate you, but by the time they're a senior for you, they would step in front of a bullet for you. And like, that was going to be a predictable deal now. Now with things being more transactional, like you're getting athletes on sometimes a 3-month contract essentially, and you have to kind of very quickly identify what their needs are and what they need, how to train them and and build that strong relationship. But kids still want to win. And so the goal ultimately always stays the same. And so I think as a strength coach, where I try to keep things kind of consistent in that environment is they want to win and they want to stay healthy and they want to play as long as they can and try to make as much money as they can. And so when you keep those goals in front of them, usually the compliance piece kind of falls in line. And then it's a matter of like, okay, what's this athlete need? And I think what I benefited from early in my career and throughout my career is that I went in and out of the NFL and college. And so the idea of that tackle or that long snapper or whoever making more money than me, that had already existed. So it wasn't about the money and all those types of things. It's like, at the end of each season, you hug and you're like, I hope you're back. I hope I'm back. And if we are, then we're going to go after this thing. It keeps everybody in the same kind of mindset.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking more along the lines of the longitudinal development of a guy, bringing him in as a high school guy. I didn't have a whole lot of contact with our freshmen during their freshman season, but at the end of their freshman year, I kind of got them in the spring, kind of start to develop that relationship with them, and I was able to watch them grow and enjoy that process of pouring into those guys and having them improve. And by the time they're seniors, now they're strong as an ox. They're out there on the field. They understand what's happening. They're able to contribute and be a big part of the program, and then take those talents on to the next level. That was always something that was fun to participate in. And now I guess it's just a little bit less joy, but still the same intense pride of having someone succeed. You get a draft pick or somebody does well you win a conference or you win a bowl game or a championship game. Those are all things to celebrate. It seems like there might be a little bit of an erosion, I guess, as far as the joy that old school coaching was able to achieve throughout that process. I guess that's kind of what I was focusing on. But you said you got those priorities that are there still.
Yeah. I mean, you keep the main thing front and center with winning and staying healthy and doing those types of things. You're right. I mean, in terms of like looking at it where I have this guy and I can develop him through 3, 4, and sometimes 5 years, like, yeah, you can't think like that any longer. I think all it's really done is it's shortened things down to where you look at each training period as what's the most that I can do with this athlete during this training period. And then if you get any time beyond that, it's bonus.
Yeah. I think back to when I was in school and our strength coach, John Sauer, shout out to Hank. I don't know where he dreamed up some of his training things that he put us through. Where did those strength and conditioning coaches go to develop those evil plans to attack the athletes? How do you guys come up with those things?
Yeah, I know John. John, what you went to William and Mary?
Yeah.
Yes, John's a good dude. I think the biggest thing is it is a challenge because like you balance this. The best feedback I ever got from one of our athletes was that they were going to take my internet away because we were coming up with so many different things, right? But I think that's part of like, how do you keep athletes entrenched? How do you keep them excited about coming to the weight room when it is January and the season's 7 months away? And that's the creativity piece. And that's what I always enjoyed. So one of my 10 principles is variety. And that's always something a filter that every training program that we develop goes through. So that way, all right, here's our workout. This is what we came up with it. How can we make it a little bit different? How can we make it a little bit more enjoyable? And it's fun for us too. Cause like I've been doing this for 30 years. Just coaching a bench press is not that much fun if it's the same thing over and over again. Right. So I think that there's a little bit of that. I mean, you got to balance like making sure that it's accomplishing what you're wanting it to accomplish. Right. But what I would always tell my staff is that we have to have meat and potatoes. Like that's going to be in every lift, but then there better be some sugar too that keeps everybody coming back for more.
I hope every other college football player experiences this, but there's nothing like that first winter workout where you get back and you can't get your hand with the shampoo to your head because there's just so much swelling in your arms that you have to pin that arm up against the shower wall and just kind of rub your head up and down to wash your head properly. I hope everybody's had that experience, but Yeah, thanks, Coach Sauer. That was a fun shower trying to get the soap to my upper body when I couldn't reach
Oh yeah.
that far up.
Yeah. I was telling them that I want to make sure that they're thinking about me when they take a dump that
That's awful. That's all. I really think there's like an evil closet that you guys can go to and just find things that are just out of this world that push people to limits, and you're like, how did you come up with this? What dream did you have that to think that this would be fun or entertaining? But of course, if he said do it, we did it. We didn't ask or question. It was just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, that's right.
Goodness gracious. So, coach, what's the recovery aspect of it as far as once you put a guy through a workout like that, are you guys stretching after the workouts? What's the end of the workout look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of things that go into that, right? And so one of the things that we would always do is we created kind of a recovery checklist that was a
Hmm.
100 scale that they had to meet 100 points before every workout coming in the next day. And
Hmm.
you got what's called your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, and your body responds to different things. So, like, not everybody responds to a cold tub. Like,
Hmm.
that's sometimes that's gotta put you in fight mode instead of flight, or flight mode instead of fight mode, or vice versa.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so, like, you got to find what works for the athlete. Was that massage? Is that red light therapy? Is that nutrition? Is that sleep? Is that variety of different things? I think the key is putting a bunch of tools around them, a vibration and, red light therapy and all those types of things that they're able to kind of choose what works best for them. And that's where the feedback and the coaching comes in, where it's like, what, you're still sore. Okay. What'd you do? I've sat in the IR the whole time. Well, how about we try the cold tub?
Yeah.
Try something different. Let's
Yeah.
see how you feel then. Right. And that's what, but what we would do on top of our normal training, which incorporated individuality, incorporated position specific training, those types of things. Then we always did what we call blitz packages, where they had to get additional work in
Mm.
for an area of deficiency. And so that's where they had to come back, work individually with a strength coach, work on their ankle flexibility, their 40 start, their jumping technique, whatever they were deficient in. And they would have to get a certain number of those in. Part of that was always recovery and having recovery blitz packages that they had to come back and do that were kind of organized. And that was kind of, we always told our athletes that we have to be involved in the other 22 hours, not just the 2 hours we got them. And
Yeah.
so that part of being involved those other 22 hours.
As you look back on your career and as you kind of evaluate guys that were coming out of high school or whatever, what's a single lift would you recommend that a high school kid does to prep himself for the collegiate level? Not necessarily Power Five, but essentially a Power Five as well. What lift would you recommend that these guys do to prep themselves?
Yeah, I turn around this question a lot back on somebody. So, like, I would ask you, what do you think that lift is?
I think the power clean or variant of it is probably you need the power, you need the acceleration. Putting those two together, I think, is probably what I would say, but I'm not as experienced as you. That's for sure.
I do that for a reason, because I think this kind of sets the precedent of how we approach every lift in our workout, where everything has a specific purpose and it's there for a specific reason, right? So, like, a torn bicep is going to keep you off the field every bit as much as like a torn
Mhm.
hamstring or something along those lines. But my answer to that question is always, I would tell you to train the neck. The neck is the most catastrophic injury in football, right? And so we want to protect that. That doesn't mean that it's any more or less important than the other
Right.
lifts. I think it's one of those things where, like, we put the same level of emphasis on every single lift that we do. And to your point, like, it's going to have power clean and any clean derivatives in there. It's going to have bench and bench derivatives and squat derivatives. Like, those are all going to be a part of any really comprehensive training program. But then every multi-joint exercise like that is going to also be followed up with isolation exercises that are going to help to prevent those or balance out those muscular imbalances or those
Mhm.
deficiencies. And so, we take the same approach on every exercise that has that level of.
For a young kid in the middle of nowhere, strengthen the neck. What would you recommend? How would you recommend going about strengthening that neck up? If he doesn't have access to a neck machine or a neck harness or whatever. What's a way or two that you would recommend doing that for 'em?
Yeah, you got flexion, you got extension, and you got lateral flexion, right? And so that can be done a variety of ways. You can do it with manual resistance, and so having a partner press against your neck.
Mhm.
both ways, right? If you don't have a partner, then leaning on a bench with just your head on the bench and your body off of it and doing an ISO hold
Okay.
for a period of time as well. Then you can make neck harnesses that are pretty cheap and attach some sort of external resistance. But
And just kind of hang the weight over and do whatever direction you're trying to
yeah,
get it done.
we'd also do things like neck tripods where you're, kind of like a wrestling exercise where
Hmm.
you're on your neck or you're flipped over and you're extended on your neck and do isolation holds like that as well that are timed. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can train the neck.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I wouldn't have thought of that. Obviously, I didn't think of that. I would have. It is important. And we always strengthen our necks, but I never really put that as a priority. I never really thought that that was something that it just happened throughout all the other exercises. It was a kind of like the end thing to do at the end of the exercise to get it done. But that is, I agree. You don't want to run into that as a problem. What's something that in your career you think has been overplayed? Something that way too much emphasis has been put upon this exercise, and if you had a magic wand and you could strike it, is there anything that you would reach out and say, "Go away"?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think they're all important. I mean, I think, there's a lot of emphasis, especially by offensive line coaches on, how much they bench, how much they squat, how much they clean. Like those are pretty relative. Like the impulse or the peak, their peak power is way more important than their absolute strength. Now, that's hard to do if you don't have like a velocity based training piece device or something along those lines to be able to understand what that is. And you can't just eyeball that, but those things are more important in figuring out where they're at on their force velocity curve, and are they force deficient or are they velocity deficient, and identify that, training for that. Well, that's the important part, what you need to do. Somebody might bench 500. Frank Davis, I told you, with a 550 bench presser, but like he could have had more power with that. That would have probably, instead of having a 3-year career, he might have had a 12-year career in the NFL.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think it's just placing too much emphasis on any one variable, I think is probably the number one thing I would say there.
Okay.
Same 40, same thing with some of these other, tests.
So, do you have what would you consider your best kept secret then as a strength coach? What's one thing that you feel like you had going on that other people just didn't realize the significance, the benefits of it?
Yeah, I mean, I was quick to use technology in my career, and so being able to measure force production was probably the magic bullet, I guess you would say, or combining that with things like mod RSI, which is is a great way to identify potential injury in a player in general, not just offensive lineman, but that's looking at the research and seeing where injury protocol or injury statistics are, combining that with mod RSI numbers, which is reactive strength index. That those types of things, it's all about, especially at our level, it's all about keeping your talent on the field. It's not they typically have the amount of strength that they need. They typically have the amount of skill that they need. It's whether or not they can simply stay on the field is usually the magic sauce there. So I would say that, and then I would just say that, like, we had a unique ability. I think everybody says it, and I think it is a prerequisite. It's not a differentiator, but like building unity throughout the year was something that we put a lot of effort into, and creating those healthy conflict moments, creating those moments where they had to lead each other and communicate with one another, in when the bullets were flying. Those were the things that we did really, really well.
Did you and I'm assuming this probably happened during your match drills, was there periods where you had the guys compete in some sort of physical competition, be it, like I talked to one of my former players at University of Florida, their match drills consisted of a gator wrestle where they jump on top of each other and have to get across the mat, or a tug
Yeah.
of war, or was there what kind of drills did you use, or was there one specific that you would use to get those guys competing to have a winner and a loser? It's important to have a winner and a loser every time in some
Yeah, totally.
places.
Yeah, we would do our agilities a little bit different than a lot of people, where most people just do it like the farmer circuit, where you go from station to station
Mhm,
and it's a time period, and you usually have the same position group and you just go around and you do
mhm.
the drills. We would do that, we would do the 8 stations like everybody else does, 4 minutes, working our way up to 6 minutes and build that just like the engine that everybody does. A lot of people stop there. What we would do is not only would we do that, but we'd make the drill position specific when they came around. So instead of just running the L drill or the whatever, the cone drill or whatever, we would do it where it became position specific and they were doing maybe kick steps or something like that if they're an offensive lineman, or we would change the drill completely. But then we would bring them together, and that was just halftime. And then from there, they would get into their teams, which we would draft teams, and that was part of that daily grade in the competition.
Mm-hmm.
You had a daily competition going on each day in the weight room. But then they would go around a force station where they would compete against the player that they were drafted in. And that's where we would do things like the L drill, the T drill, 60 shuttle, tire flips, anything where it could be 1 versus 1. And that was your bragging rights. That's where you would go against somebody that was drafted with similar ability, similar talent. And it was basically you versus me. And if I won, I was talking crap the rest of the day. And won, you were talking crap the rest of the day. And that was kind of a running thing to where at the end of the agilities, we would have the national championship, which was the 2 best teams, and we'd have the toilet bowl, which was the 2 worst teams. And then we'd have a bunch of bowls in between. And that made it fun, right? Because it was competition, but that also got them going at the fastest pace that they would go when they're dog tired, which is really what I would get out of it.
Yeah.
We would then finish that up because it was four stations. We would finish with a finisher where it was all the things you're talking about. It was the tug of wars. It was the tire flips. It was the tire carries, the drags, anything and everything that we could think of to make them compete one-on-one.
Yeah.
And that's what we would do, the individual matchups like you're talking, and call out guys from different positions, different, classes and whatever. And it's time to go and compete in front of your team and your peer.
That is key, I think, to success, particularly in off season, man. When it's like the end of March and April, and you finish with spring ball, and you've just been lifting and doing those things. I guess that'd be more like winter before the spring ball starts. You just need something to get through those doldrums where it just gets boring and drawn out and plain. You're going to get gassed in the weight room, and the strength coach is going to take it out of you. And at least it gives you something to look forward to. That's on bragging rights. That's awesome. When you said they're working out with cards, you give them cards. Did you have like measurements that you would do each day? Like if would you have a lift? Like let's say you said bench press earlier, they might be doing 5 sets of 8. Was there like you track that weight? Was there something that you give them as a goal to try to get to each day?
Yeah. And most of it's
winter?
digital now, where we have iPads.
Oh, okay.
And things like that. But yeah, I mean, each person's workout's got a prescription of what we're asking them to do for that day, what was prescribed weights, prescribed set rep schemes.
But was there a test of any sort? When we're in a weight room, we might do a 5 rep. Let's say a 5 rep on power cleans. Your 5 rep is, I don't know, 220. Kid gets on the power clean. He knows today you got a rep 5 power clean rep 5 test. And so they call coach over. He's got to watch him do the five reps. And then we go up to the board where his name, a little weight card is, and we switch it out. And he does it. He's trying to beat that record by 5. So puts 225 on the bar to see if he can do it 5 times. And that's that kind of was something that motivated our guys too. Did you have something like that you guys did?
I think within the workout itself, we have their previous best. We have their all-time best and their previous best for every lift. That's every set as well. And so they're always kind of having that level of competition that you're talking about against themselves. We would have leaderboards as well in terms of like peak power, peak velocity, and those types of things, where we had kind of a running board that was on the screens that guys could kind of again create that energy.
Aim for, shoot for.
And then we would also have like diagnostics that we would drop in throughout the lift, or kind of tests that we would always track to kind of see where things were giving us a bunch of feedback. So kind of like to your point, like that 60% set on our warm-up set every single time was a diagnostic that we would track to see if there was starting to be any kind of overtraining markers that were showing up, that their speed started dropping off, and that was across the board. Then we knew that the entire group was kind of overtrained a little bit. Or we would do like a counter movement jump where, again, that was a leaderboard so you could get the highest, but it was also giving us feedback about our program.
Right. I can only imagine what it looked like. I mean, just a well-oiled machine, which is kind of why you have to take them through that week of training, just so you can move fast and get them going. If they don't know what they're doing, you can't really teach them on the fly. They'll get in the way and you won't get anything done, and you'll spend so much time directing that you won't get anything out of the workout. As we wind up here and get to the last part, and I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, is because you kind of get the guys off. They're not on the field playing. They're not doing football. So there's a little bit more room for the lighter side of the offensive line, particularly. Is there anything that a group of guys, have you met a better group of guys to just be silly and like just random, hysterically funny guys than the offensive line? And if so, you have any stories that you could tell about the offensive line in the weight room that would illustrate how crazy and zany most of those guys are?
Yeah, I don't have any real stories of like just crazy. I mean, the offensive line that comes to mind out of all the groups that I've worked with was the group we had at Washington. They won the Joe Moore Award. It was something that was a goal that we had set at the beginning of the year that we kept front and center. We had a picture of that trophy at every rack that they trained at, and they would break on it every single day. But it was a good mix of, you had the Polynesian Troy Fatano, who that was kind of always easy going, but kept things light, but strong as an ox. You had Roger Rosengarten, so you had a first round draft pick in Troy. You had a third round draft pick in Roger that was always playful and just kind of kept everything light when everything was a joke, but also had an intensity about him. You had Parker Brailsford, who's probably going to be a first rounder this year, that at center, that was the young kid but was straight laced, did everything right, and often would round those guys back up. And then you had Julius from Hawaii as well, that was 6'7", 330 pounds, and Nate Kalepo was playing for the Buccaneers right now. And so it was a good group that had the right mix of training and competition, internal competition amongst themselves, but would keep it fun and light, and could get through tough training sessions, but still, come out with everybody smiling. So I think you got to have that. You got to encourage that. You can't stifle that. As a coach, I think you got to embrace that, but you have to find ways to keep them corralled and going in the right direction. And I think that's where competition really comes in.
Yeah. And I know this is true with Coach Sauer. How many cups of coffee a day were you going through?
I'm not a coffee drinker.
No. Okay. What was your caffeine vehicle of choice?
I'll drink about 4 Diet Pepsis a day.
Okay. So. All right. So there's definitely some sort of caffeinated vehicle getting into the body somehow there, right?
For sure. Yeah. And you have to, I think I did the math at one point between Fresno, Washington, and Alabama. So 5-year span, I had like 22 total days off in 5 years. So like where I didn't go into the office or something. So like it's, again, some people wear that like a badge. That's not a badge of honor. You don't take it that way, but it that level of development, that level of it just requires it. And you have to, there's days that I was there for 16, 18 hours.
Yeah. And you got to bring it too. It's not like you're just showing up watching.
I think the biggest thing that, like, it used to be like the strength coach was like the stepchild that just stayed in the weight room, and you would feed it every once in a while. And it was like, I think it's gotten to a point where that position is so valuable throughout the entire organization. Yeah. You're being put into a bunch of different situations because you're probably the most adaptable person on staff a lot of times, and you have the pulse of the team, and that's valuable information when you're trying to go after a championship.
Absolutely. Coach, tell me a little bit about where anybody that's listening can find more information about you, your podcast, your book, if you want to talk about that real quick and let people know about that.
Yeah. The easiest way would be at McKeefery on all the socials. I'm not on there as much, but I do try to respond to everybody. And I've got a podcast, CEO Strength Coach, is based off a book that I wrote by the same title. I have a couple books that I've written. Weight Room Wisdom is the other one, which is a good kind of, that's the book of a bunch of messages that I would give the guys before every lift, which is a good kind of takeaway. It's almost like a devotional book for coaches to be able to use. But yeah, no, I'm just trying to give back to the community that in a profession that's given me so much, and that's where you can find me.
Well, Coach, you've definitely had your successes, and before we leave, I had one more question for you. I almost forgot. When I was reading your bio, this is something that popped off of the page to me. Give me a quick difference between training a baseball player and training a football player. I know it seems like are there commonalities there, or is it completely two different thoughts?
Yeah. To be fair, I worked pro baseball for about 6 months right out of college. So this was,
but hey, it's still there though. I'm curious. Is there something that like the commonalities, or is it just completely different? I'm curious because you get those baseball players who are like, I don't want to weight train and get muscle bound. I'm like, dude, just get in the weight room.
I think the sport has come a long way to where people understand that you have to be physically fit. You have to, and they probably better than even football understand the force power, the speed power,
Mm-hmm.
more important than the absolute strength mass, right? But I think the biggest difference between coaching those guys is that, yeah, you have to keep it loose in baseball. Like it just, that culture just requires it. And so the very authoritative, very kind of, the more buttoned up you are, the harder that process is going to be. So you have to be unique in the way that you train them and still accomplish the same goals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where a lot of the things, all the competitions that I would do, all the fun workouts and the team building workouts and things like that. Like one thing we didn't talk about, but every 4 weeks I do a team. It's either a team builder or it's an ass kicker, one of the two. Like it's something that you're going to remember for the rest of your career. And so that's everything from running the stairs to the top of the Space Needle in Seattle to
Jeez.
doing sand dune workouts up on the one of the Great Lakes up in Michigan, or hiking a mountain in Tennessee. Like it's something that you're going to remember. It's going to be a life experience.
You made him run up the Space Needle, Coach?
Yeah, multiple times.
It's a long elevator ride.
It is. It is a lot of stairs. I ran it with them.
Gosh.
I think it's one of those things where you got to incorporate those types of things. And you should be doing it with your football players as well. But like with baseball, like that training environment has to be loose, and you can still accomplish all the same amount of work, but keep things loose.
That's an excellent observation. Well, thank you for sharing that with me, because I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it was something I was like, oh my gosh, what's that? I'm curious about that. That would be a good answer to hear. Well, I appreciate you taking time out with us, Coach, and no doubt you have years and years of wisdom involved there that people should, if they're looking for it, seek you out, because you were very willing and quick to help me out and agree to be here and speak today. And I'm thankful for having that information that you shared with us. And any other closing comments you want to make or thoughts I might have missed?
No, I appreciate what you doing this, and know how much goes into a podcast and getting this kind of information out there. And so I appreciate what you're doing for the community, and good luck with this.
Well, thank you, Coach. I appreciate it. And as we get ready to finish here, just remember, if you master the trench, you'll win the battle. Thank you, Coach. Hope you're enjoying Trenchometry. Assuming that you are, please hit that like button and subscribe. Remember, master the trench, you win the war.